What's going on, YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy, Kevin Forte, and today we're taking a look at the Philadelphia Flyers, as there is a lot to talk about on Broad Street right now, as the Flyers have kind of blown things up, and obviously that's happened here over the last couple of days. There's been a lot of interesting things that have come out since then, so I wanted to give it some time to stew, and I think this is the perfect time for me to talk about this, because it goes so far beyond Chuck Fletcher at this point. I'm not sure a ton of people realize that. When you look at the Flyers right now, even before Chuck Fletcher came in, this has been a big problem for the Philadelphia Flyers. And a lot of it goes back to, one of the guys that's still there, a couple of guys that are still there in the Flyers organization, and the mentality of the organization, for as long as I can remember, as long as I've been alive and watching hockey, the mentality has been trying to bring back that 70s and 80s mentality of the Flyers back, but in a modern version, right? And that is the Philly way, right? And those guys that are kind of on the forefront of that are Paul Holmgren, who was a GM of the team in the mid-2010s. Obviously, he got booted upstairs, but he's still with the organization here in 2023. It's been a decade since he's been the GM of the Flyers. He's still around, making big decisions. Phil Barber, he's been around here as well for a pretty long time, but similar mentality, former Philadelphia Flyer. And Bobby Clarke. Again, same thing. Former Flyers that have come back, stayed with the team for a long time, and their input on the team, not that it's not invalid, it's just not working. And the problem is, they get rid of Chuck Fletcher, and that's kind of the boogeyman. But in reality, a lot of it comes back to the ownership of Comcast, which Flyers fans have been very heavily, on. And these guys that are still here in Holmgren, Barber, and Bobby Clarke. So when you talk about what do the Flyers need to do here, well, I think a lot of this comes back to the ownership in NBC. In the past 6 months, they've had a new owner or a new CEO there in Comcast. So that could end up being a good thing. And this is going to be the test of whether it's ownership or not. Because if ownership is willing to get rid of those three guys that I just mentioned, that's Comcast doing their job. And getting rid of guys that aren't necessarily, even if they have the best intentions, aren't really helping the Flyers get where they need to go, which is a full-on rebuild. And again, kind of along the lines of a full-on rebuild that probably includes Danny Briere getting kicked out as well. And not that I don't think Danny Briere has potential. We've seen what he's done with the analytics and stuff like that. He's taken people from Flyers Nation and things like that. Good moves there. But I think what he said in his press conference still leaves you wondering, because apparently the quote that he said that had me kind of, my ears perk up, is he said, this is not going to be a quick fix, but it might not mean a full fire sale. How does it not involve a full fire sale? Like, this team needs to completely gut this thing out from the ground up. And I think most Flyers fans would agree with me on that. Just the amount of drama that's gone on in Philadelphia this season alone should be enough for the Flyers to decide, we need to gut this thing from the ground up. From ownership down to the backup goaltender or the third string goalie in Lehigh Valley. Everything has to be restructured and re-gutted. And I think that's kind of the paradox here, right? Are they willing to move out those senior advisors that have been there forever and bring in a completely new blood group? Ray Shero, Fred Shero, Eric Lindros, Chris Pronger, those are the names being mentioned, which doesn't give me any faith that the Flyers are really going in that right direction, which is a full rebuild from the ground up. And that's the problem, right? You don't want to see any ex-Flyers back. I think a lot of Flyers fans have shown their frustration with that. Like I said, Danny Briere could maybe be the exception to that, but the fact he said maybe not a full fire sale does leave me saying, no, 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 no. That is not going to work here. You need a full fire sale on Broad Street. And I think that the Flyers fans are wanting a rebuild at this point. They've seen what's happened here. The drama on the ice with Kevin Hayes and John Tortorella, Tony DeAngelo and John Tortorella, the JVR non-trade at the deadline. I mean, as much as it was a bad look for Fletcher and probably ultimately costed him his job, I mean, JVR, that's kind of not doing him a service. Teams around the league are going to see that, and a guy's going to decide, well, if I want to get traded, do I want to go to a place where, listen, I know I'm probably not going to stay there, and now you couldn't even find a trade for me? That's a lack of competency, if nothing else. That's the kind of stuff that's a bad look for the Flyers. And to top it all off, the JVR trade, that Ranger game a couple of weeks ago, I think Flyers fans have really burned that into their memory. They already have enough with New York fans going into Philadelphia during this summer when Met fans take over Citizens Bank Park. Now they have Ranger fans taking over Wells Fargo Arena. It's not a good look. And I think that the Flyers and their fans are sick of it. And the way they treated that at, I think it's Xfinity Live. I've been there once to Philadelphia for a game last year, and it was dead. I was really disappointed. The lack of, I think I was 8 rows up behind the Flyers bench, and I think it was like $50 a ticket. That should not be happening in mid-February. And I think that's when I went. The middle of February, end of February, around this time last year. That's unacceptable. That is unacceptable. They have one of the biggest buildings in the NHL in Wells Fargo Arena. It's unacceptable. But the way this team's been playing, you can't really blame them. And the Ranger fans treating it like MSG 2.0 in Philadelphia, it was really embarrassing. And I think that combination of everything that's gone on this season, yeah, they got Chuck Fletcher out, but they need to do a lot more than that. They need to get younger. They need to get faster, more skilled. They don't score enough goals. If the Flyers give up 3 goals, it's a wrap. They cannot score. They can barely score 2 goals a game. And as an Islanders fan, I can relate to that because the Islanders, it seems like it takes them so much work to score a goal just to have the other team just come back and score just like that. And all the momentum goes out the door. And the Flyers are very similar in that sense. They have the same kind of mentality, that defensive first mentality, block every shot possible, be accountable on your own end, and I'm fine with that. But it gets to a point where you're so deficient in scoring goals that no matter how good you play defensively, you give up 2 or 3 goals, it's a wrap. You cannot come back and win those games. And they're not really entertaining, and let's be honest, they're not winning games. So if nothing else, as much as we love the Broad Street Bullies mentality and this and that, it's great. Fans love fights. They love seeing all that. But they want to see wins, I think, more. And this was a really good article on The Athletic the other day. Obviously, I'm not going to get too far into it, but if you guys have it, you should definitely take a look because, where is this? I'm trying to find it. Incredible article here the other day, and I was reading it. It's from Charlie O'Connor of The Athletic, and there's 270 comments. The Flyers fans came out, and I'm just going to read a couple of them, just so you guys get an idea. This is from Patrick. He said, I started following the Flyers on The Athletic after they hired Tortorella, and I've got to say, Charlie O'Connor does an outstanding job. He's informed perspective. Yep. I want to just see what some of these guys are thinking. This is from a Rangers fan. He said, great article, very logical. Hopefully no Flyers leadership reads it. I think they're doing just fine. That's from a Rangers fan. Making the decision to remove the old guard and get fresh blood in here is the thing that will restore some sense of hope for me. Exactly. All Flyers fans have that idea that Chuck Fletcher was the start, but there is so many things that are still wrong with this team. Even though they're in the right direction, there's a lot that still needs to be done. And like I mentioned, some of the things that need to get done, listen, the one bright spot to this team, maybe 2, is Cutter Gauthier, who's playing at Boston College, and Cam York, who's been up and down with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. And speaking of the Phantoms, they need to redevelop the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. Chuck Fletcher, I think on maybe one occasion in January, mentioned the Lehigh Valley Phantoms since he joined the team in 2018. It's unacceptable. The Phantoms need life in Lehigh Valley. There's not enough focus on development. And again, with Chuck Fletcher, it's always been about trying to just get things done today, right? It's always patchwork or whack-a-mole or whatever you want to call it. It's never for the long-term future. And I think we're seeing some of those issues really come to the forefront with the Philadelphia Flyers. And, you know, like I said, it even starts at the top with Comcast CEO Dave Scott. Like, from there down, there is so much that has to change. And, you know, looking into the future, some of the names that's been mentioned for the next GM and player of hockey operations, they're two separate jobs that they're trying to have here. Instead of having like a Chuck Fletcher where it's both, you're going to have one guy for each position. So Danny Briere's been mentioned, Eddie Olczyk, Eric Lindros, Chris Pronger. I know everyone's freaking out because those are the names you don't want to hear. You want to hear guys from the outside, right? Word from the outside. Outside of the Flyers bubble, right? Like I said, they should be prioritizing the development in Lehigh Valley. That's a huge thing for the Flyers right now that they are heavily lacking. The lack of good prospects coming out of Philadelphia recently or coming out of Lehigh Valley, the way they've handled guys like Isaac Ratcliffe, Nolan Patrick. I think it was more Patrick just not being very good, but nonetheless, Isaac Ratcliffe trading him for not even skates and a bag of pucks to the Predators at the deadline. Not a great look. He's a former highly regarded prospect, right? Isaac Ratcliffe. Again, fits the mold, that power forward, big 6'4", 200 pounds when drafted guy. Not really worked out, right? Jackson and Noah Cates have seen mitigating success, right? I think a little bit more confidence recently. The slow development, even though it seems to be getting there, but the slow development of Morgan Frost has been concerning. So, again, and even Ivan Provorov, right, at one point was going to be a number one D-man, hopefully in the conversation for a Norris Trophy back in 2020. 3 years later, he looks like maybe a good fringe second pairing guy. Again, that is Travis Sanheim. Same thing, big body. Nothing worked out. Samuel and Travis Morin. What happened to those big defensemen? They haven't been very good. So it's just the lack of good players coming out of Lehigh Valley and the draft that, again, more questions to be answered than actual answers being resolved, right? And again, that's the lack of competency in the Flyers front office. So what do I think they have to do at the end of the day? Like I said, the main focus is I think they got to get fresh blood in there. They have to get somebody that's outside of that Flyers bubble, a guy that hasn't worn the crest, that doesn't know the Flyers way, and it's just a new look and a new mentality in Philadelphia. That's the first thing. The second thing, like I said, prioritizing the development and working on the prospect scouting team, stuff like that. I think that's going to be really important. And like I said, the development in Lehigh Valley. I think that's a really big part as well. The other thing, and that's kind of the big focal point picture of this group, is the idea that they have to move away from the Broad Street Bullies, the 1970s, 1980s era of the Philadelphia Flyers. I know it's a hard idea. It's something that you're definitely... It's a different look for the Flyers, right? But we've seen the Devils do something similar just down the road. That team that, you know, the Devils, you guys don't like very much, you know, they got very far away from the Lou Lamoriello, Ray Shero era, right? Bringing in Tom Fitzgerald, bringing in Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, and Luke Hughes, Simon Nemec, all these guys. It's a different look than the Ken Danico, you know, I'm trying to think of some of these other guys. You guys know who I'm talking about, though, right? Scott Stevens, that era of the Devils, the Lou Lamoriello era of the Devils in the in the 90s and the early 2000s, Marty Brodeur, they were able to separate that team's success from the 2020s. And yeah, they finally added that big guy, right? The problem with the Devils was, well, they didn't have enough big guys, right? Jesper Bratt, Hughes, Heishier, all those smaller framed guys, and then they bring in Timo Meyer, right? So there is still that element of bringing in bigger players into the game, but they've built themselves around speed and skill. And last time I checked, the Devils tomorrow night are going to be fighting for tonight, are going to be fighting for the top of the division against the Carolina Hurricanes. And you're going to sit here and tell me as a Flyers fan that they're doing it the wrong way? I think Flyers fans have accepted it, but the question is, it doesn't really matter for the fans. To some point, it matters with the fans. Is the ownership going to clean out the house and accept the fact that they need to completely rebuild? Everybody has to go, and they need to get speedier, faster, maybe a little bit smaller. And I think, again, a lot of that also comes back to what they didn't do with Johnny Gaudreau. He was begging at the front door, giving edible arrangements to the Flyers management. He wanted to always be a Flyer. That was always his goal. And he ended up having to go to Columbus because they never gave him an offer. There was never really interest from the Flyers to even look that way toward Johnny Hockey Gaudreau. And look how things have turned out, not picking him up. Those guys don't kind of walk up to your door every day. There's 32 NHL franchises. The chances that there's a guy that wants to go to your team, take all the heat from his current fan base in Calgary, and want to go to your team, and you don't even give him an offer. You don't want him. Unbelievable. But again, that's all part of the mentality. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Who are some names that you would like to see as the next president of hockey operations and also the next GM of the Philadelphia Flyers? Let me know your guys' thoughts down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys again next time.